Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to discuss the Common App Essay 2021-2022 prompts. So let's get started. Before we start, I want to leave a disclaimer that this is entirely my opinion on the essays from what I've seen for reading essays the past couple years and from what knowledge I've gained in terms of how to address these sort of prompts when you're applying to colleges. So please just take this advice for what it is. It is my opinion, and I'm truly giving my opinion to help you guys with your essays, but know that it is totally up to you what you do with your essays, and that's honestly the best thing that you can do for yourself moving forward in this college application process. Now that we got that out of the way, I also want to give you another disclaimer that might prompt you to not even watch this video, which is totally fine by me if you really take this information to heart. And what that is that these prompts only exist for you. So what that means is that it is not for the admissions officers. They're not looking for anything specific when you address these prompts. That being said, it doesn't matter which prompt you choose. The prompts are there for you to know what kinds of things that you can talk about in your college essay. Otherwise, if there weren't any prompts at all, you wouldn't know whether to write a book review or a poem or a song or just write a creative writing piece about something else entirely, as opposed to a really engaging autobiography about yourself. So that being said, any prompt that you choose is really there to help you identify what most meaningful story that you can write down on paper that'll help admissions officers get to know you. And that's all they're really there for. So do not stress too much about which prompt you choose, as long as you have a story or experience that you really want to talk about that really resonates with you. Okay, as we go over these prompts, we're going to really talk about the semantics of the prompt, what types of things that you can use in these prompts, because a lot of times people don't know that they have really relevant stories to what the prompts are asking about, but just don't know that that is what the prompt is looking for there. So hopefully I'll be able to help you identify those, as well as just pros and cons of each prompt, or how to navigate the prompt if it's a prompt that you choose. Okay, now that we got the disclaimers out of the way, let's get started with the prompts. So the first prompt is: some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. So this prompt is really awesome because it's the most broad prompt, and you can really tell a lot about yourself, a variety of things about yourself in this prompt, because it's asking about your background, your identity, or your talents, which covers a wide range of things for a lot of people. Some things to think about in terms of background would be your family background, ethnic background, childhood background, or life experience background in general. So basically anything that provides background information to who you are today. So how you grew up or where you grew up and things like that can really influence the kind of background that'll really help an admissions officer get to know you. In terms of identity, there's lots of things that you could talk about identity, like race, religion, ethnicity. Again, you can also talk about sexuality and also any other personal identifiers. Some people talk about the region where they grew up because that's really important to them, and that could be a really core identifier to their personality, how they are today, how they interact with the world, etc. In terms of talents, you can talk about any talent that you've had for a long time or that you've developed over time. I think this prompt, no matter whether you talk about background, identity, or talent, is really good at hitting on the fact that you want to talk about something that's developed over time and is shaped to who you are over time. So I think that's a really good thing about this prompt, and that's what that's really what they're looking for. So if you do talk about identity or talent that you have, don't focus in on just one moment and only talk about that instant if there's other stories that lead up to it. Obviously, you can focus on a very specific instant, but make sure that you at least contextualize the before and after of that instant that you're talking about in your essay, in terms of why that specific experience is really important to who you are today. So one thing that I want to caution about talents is that you want to choose something that's core specific to you. For example, I have a talent of memorizing random information for no reason. For example, at one point in time, I memorized over 250 digits of pi, and I also memorized every single country and their flag that they have. So those are random things that I just like to do in terms of like testing my memory and challenging myself in that way. But that definitely wouldn't be a talent that I would write a personal statement about, because I just wouldn't have that much to say about it. So if you are talking about a talent, you really want to choose something that you are able to talk about. And again, that's why I highlighted things that represent you over a long period of time would work best in terms of helping an admissions officer get to know you for this prompt. There's also things in this prompt that I probably forgot about, which is awesome because it's so broad. So don't be afraid to choose this prompt, and don't be concerned as to whether or not the thing that you want to talk about is relevant to this prompt, because again, as long as it hits on helping an admissions officer get to know you personally, then it's going to be a really good story for this prompt. So the second prompt is, the lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you, and what did you learn from the experience? So I think that this prompt is the one that people misuse the most. Obviously, it's not intentionally, but it does happen. I think it's because people are drawn to this prompt because they think, oh, I need to show some sort of struggle in order to stand out for admissions. And that's simply not true. The thing that makes people stand out in admissions is how personal their story is and how effective it is in terms of allowing the admissions office to get to know you, and whether or not that knowledge resonates with them in terms of admitting you to their school. So you don't have to talk about a specific obstacle that you faced in your life, although that's a very relevant experience for some people, which is why this prompt exists. In terms of failure, note that they're not looking for a literal academic failure within this prompt. I typically advise that the personal statement is a really amazing place that you want to talk about anything but academics, because the whole rest of your application is going to talk about your academic career, and there's lots of other places that you can talk about academic struggles in terms of the additional information section. For example, I did have a literal F on a test for calculus once, and it was the midterm, so that did affect my GPA slightly, but I had done so well for that entire semester that it only ended up with a B or B plus. In the next semester, I got all A's and showed growth. So this would not be a good space for me if I wanted to talk about not passing that test, because it wasn't a failure that had any significant impact on my academic career or who I am today. It happens, and that's totally normal. So I don't want you to feel stressed that if something didn't go well for you, that you have to make your entire personal statement about that, because your personal statement is really supposed to help admissions officers get to know you personally. If you use that space to talk about a singular hiccup in your life, that doesn't necessarily demonstrate some sort of growth, but you're trying to cover your tracks for you think that failure would help you not get admitted, I wouldn't recommend that, because then you lose out on all the opportunities where they actually get to know you as an individual. And in terms of like the competitive nature of the application, if other people are allowing admission officers to get to know them personally and your essay sets yourself up to not do that, then it's not going to work out for you very well in the long run if it comes down to your essay in terms of whether or not you'll be admitted. So I would really try to focus on personal identifiers and making it as personalized as possible. Now, for a lot of other people, there are challenges, failures, and setbacks that are really integral to how they've grown up in life, or something that significantly changed their life. For example, moving to a new country, assimilation, deaths in the family if they're really close to you, living on your own, financial instability, or transportation hindrances are just a few examples of challenges or setbacks that people might want to talk about here. Talking about any sort of discrimination is something that people have also faced, unfortunately, growing up, and this could also be a good place for you to talk about that here if that applies to you. What's most important, though, is that you demonstrate some sort of adaptability, or really narrate how your life changed after or in the later stages of that significant challenge that you may have experienced or be experiencing currently. One thing that I will caution you about when you're talking about a challenge, setback, or failure is to not over narrate the difficulty of that experience, because more likely than not, it's already really apparent how difficult that experience or challenge that you're facing is. So you don't want to waste a fifth or 2/5 of your essay narrating or reinforcing that this was something that was really difficult or this was something that's really horrible, and not providing specific examples or specific personal narration to that experience. So oftentimes, instead of actually talking about your personal experience with that challenge, people will just talk about the challenge itself and rely on the obstacle and difficulty of the topic to carry their essay, as opposed to talking about your personal experience with that challenge. And that's the most important part, because that will demonstrate adaptability without you having to explicitly use the word adaptability. And it will also demonstrate who you are as a person, because we as readers will get to see how you interact, what you did for when you face those significant obstacles and things like that. So the third prompt is: reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking, and what was the outcome? Again, you want to be unapologetically yourself in these essays, and schools will choose people that resonate with them and who share like-minded interests or things that they want to see. So don't be afraid to do that. I definitely talked about religion in a lot of my supplemental essays, because that was something that was really important to me growing up, but kind of like, you know, my relationship with religion, I guess. And I'll definitely read those essays to you guys later, so we don't have to talk too much about that, but just know that it's okay to talk about those things if they're relevant to you. I do want to talk about the semantics of this prompt a little bit more. So when the prompt uses the word questioning, it still wants you to talk about a tangible experience in terms of how you behaved while you were questioning some belief or idea. So a lot of times people will ignore that fact and only write an entire essay talking about, these are all the questions that I have, these are all the questions that made me question other things, and yada yada. But having internal thoughts isn't necessarily going to communicate how you interact with the world and really who you are as a person. So you want to make sure that if you're questioning something, you have tangible experiences and anecdotes that kind of actually reflect things that you did because you were questioning this idea. So again, even if you have an anecdote about having this sort of question, an internal thought monologue is not an anecdote. So you really have to make sure that you have tangible things that you can reflect to. And tangible things might be actively doing research, actively asking people these questions, and what you did after you learned the answers. Or you could really, or if it's something that's really impactful for you and you learned a lot from it, maybe you started a club or you wanted to raise awareness about this thing that you're questioning previously. Maybe you wrote a piece on it, etc. There's a lot of tangible things that people do. And by tangible, it doesn't need to be a physical outcome. It's just any experience that you've outwardly done because of your internal thoughts. The same thing goes with challenging an idea or a prompt, that even if you can't just mentally challenge that idea, you need to have like tangible experiences that you can demonstrate how you challenge those ideas. And you really want to stray away from only referencing like, oh, I started paying attention to this thing more, because again, that's still very internal. Even if you're just paying attention to something more, that doesn't necessarily demonstrate you doing something about it or you interacting with people because of it. So for some people, for some instances, just thinking about something more might demonstrate something personal, but typically more often than not, it doesn't. So that's just something that I would be careful about. All right, prompt number 4. Reflect on something that someone has done for you that has made you happy or thankful in a surprising way. How has this gratitude affected or motivated you? So I think this prompt, back when I was applying in like 2018, talked about like who's a significant person or mentor in your life. And I'm really glad that they changed this prompt, because I think before, a lot of people were falling into the trap of writing a biography about another person and not writing an engaging autobiography story about themselves. So I think this gives an opportunity for students to really reflect on and discuss how that person impacted you as an individual, and how your relationship with that person has developed, and how that maybe shaped who you are today. So I think that's something that's really great. And because of that, I don't think you necessarily you don't need to focus on happy or thankful in a surprising way. I would say that you don't have to address this prompt directly. I definitely, when I wrote my Common App essay, it did not directly address the prompt. The subject of my essay addressed the prompt, but never did I say, this is something that I think about hours on end because blank, right? So again, if there's a person or mentor that's really influential in your life, you don't have to explicitly write, I was thankful in the most surprising way because of this person, because blank, right? Actually, funnily enough, when I was applying to a program, I was inspired to write an essay that was a theme of all of the mentors that I've had in my life. Because for me, every single math teacher, with the exception of middle school, was a female math teacher. And I think that was really influential for me becoming an engineer today. Funnily enough, I'm now in a research class that specifically focuses on increasing the retention of girls in STEM and minimizing the amount of obstacles that girls might face when navigating the STEM world, just because of how male dominant it is currently. And in my very small anecdote that I told you guys just now, never did I say, oh, they made me really happy or really thankful, but that story would still be really relevant for this kind of prompt. So I encourage you to not think of this prompts very verbatim, word for word. And if you have something relevant that motivates you to write about, definitely put that here. Or if you really wanted to, you could save that story for prompt number 7 if you feel like it doesn't apply to this prompt or any of the others. So number 5 is discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of yourself or others. Because they really want to get to know their students personally, to see how you're different. Because a lot of us applying to colleges will compete in competitions and do really well, or try to do really well, with the intent of getting into college, or like having something to show for our interests. And so because that's already like a common baseline experience and desire for the majority of college applicants, talking about that as your personal statement isn't going to help personalize your experience or differentiate you. Definitely talk about your achievements in your supplementals. That's what I did, because again, they still want to see that in your application. It's just this wouldn't necessarily be the space to do that. This question is also broad like the first one, because you can talk about an accomplishment, event, or realization that significantly impacted you. And I really want to focus on like the significant impact. You can't just talk about the event or realization and leave it at that, because they want to know how your life changed afterwards because of that event, or how your mentality, your behavior, your interaction with the world changed because of that event. And I think that's something really important, because that is like the secrecy, like in this prompt, that's how they're prompting you to show growth, if that's relevant to you. Again, I feel like a lot of people feel like, oh, it's mandatory to demonstrate growth, and I have to use sentences that say, and here this made me grow, in order to communicate to colleges that I am like a flower and grow a lot or over time. And that's simply not true either. Only talk about growth if it's relevant to you, or if you can specifically think of a relevant experience. Because more often than not, I've read essays where people try to shoehorn some sort of growth or life lesson into an experience that clearly wasn't there. And you can just tell, because they're making really dramatic leaps from, oh, once I kicked a rock and that helped me realize that I wanted to go to outer space and really change the world for the better, because viewing Earth from the moon and like the universe as a whole is what helps me understand how to be a better person and treat other people better. Like, I've read essays that would make jumping conclusions like that, and it's like, okay, that's probably definitely not true. And even if it's not that extreme, like maybe you've played an instrument once and helped you grow into learning that if you try really something that was difficult at first, like you'll get better. I really want to advise, I'm going to talk more about this in another video, but you definitely want to avoid making Dr. Seuss statements as the main focus of your personal statement. I don't know why a lot of people do this, but they'll make the main focus of their essay. Well, it's a very common trap to fall into when you're writing about growth essays. So they'll choose a main takeaway and repeat that for the entire essay. An example of that would be saying something like, you won't get better unless you try at something. And somebody will repeat that same like thought or that takeaway the entire essay without really without having any personal reflection, right? So that's a very generic, universal statement that a lot of people are already familiar with. So it might be a little bit concerning if you're talking about how later in your life, and using as your personal statement that you learn the value of trying something, because trying, like, you know, because trying something like helps you get better at it, etc., whatever. So that can be really concerning if that's what you choose to write as your personal statement, but also it doesn't help us to get to know you personally at all, because you're saying something that would probably be better served as an example of like a children's book. Hello, it is editing me again, this time not for my car, which is very surprising, but nonetheless not surprising that I had to throw in an extra clip. I wanted to clarify what I meant when I said this should belong in a children's book, because I said that very, like, to me it made sense in my head, but then I realized listening back, you know, that sounds very aggressive and not nice. What I meant by that is that a typical format of a children's book has a moral of the story, and I feel like a lot of people try to make their essays in order to stand out or be more unique or look impactful, so that they try to have like a moral of the story in their essay. And I feel like that is something that you don't want to do, because more often than not, like, the definition of the moral of a story is something that is really universal and non-unique, can relate to everyone. So if your main takeaway or moral of your story in your personal statement is something that is something that applies to everyone and is relevant to everyone, then if you spend your whole essay trying to teach your admissions officer about this moral of the story that you think that your life experience is a really good teachable moment for, then you're going to lose a lot of the personability of the life experience that you're talking about, because you're focusing instead on the very universal and generic moral of the story. So that's why I would just stray away from that entirely. You don't need a moral of the story, because the main moral of the story, the main takeaway, the meat of your essay should be the experience itself. So you don't need to have any additional meaning. You don't need to add or manifest any additional meaning to that experience, because that experience already holds all the meaning that you would need to convey. So that's my take on that, and hopefully that makes sense. If not, I'm sorry, it's late, but I think that makes sense. Anyway, we can carry back to the regular video now. Thanks. Communicating this to like younger people who might not have learned that about life yet, but again, that's not your audience here. Who your audience is somebody who wants to read an autobiography about you. They want to get to know you. So just focus on you and your story, and don't try to shoehorn like overarching themes or takeaways that would take away from your personality in your essay. All right, so the next prompt is describe a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you turn to when you want to learn more? So this was the prompt that I responded to in my personal statement, which is already uploaded as a video. I'll link that down below. But essentially, you can talk about any interest here, so anything like film, physics, science, art, etc. You could talk about anything that is relevant to your interests or hobbies. I would use this as a space to talk about things that are more related to hobbies or personal interests as opposed to academic interests, just because you don't want to be redundant in your application. And again, there's a lot of spaces in supplemental essays where schools will ask, what career do you want to have, or what do you want to do when you grow up, etc. So you don't necessarily want to waste words here talking about that or being redundant. However, for some people, there's a very significant overlap in terms of their hobbies and interests and what they want to do when they grow up. And if that's you, then that would be a great thing to talk about in your application. Truth be told, I did talk about math as my interest when I was writing my application. However, as you'll notice when you hear me read it, I did not talk about how I wanted to do math as a career or how I thought that math was like a valuable thing that I really liked in school. I didn't talk about that at all. So I just talked about my personal relationship with a very, very specific field of math that isn't even talked about in school and isn't necessarily relevant to what I want to do later in life, but we'll see about that, because, you know, theses, maybe I'll work that in there. That would be really fun. But yeah. In terms of concepts, though, you don't necessarily have to talk about a academic, educational, or you don't have to talk about a topic like I mentioned before, music, etc. You can also talk about concepts like inspirational quotes or natural laws, or a phrase that was passed down in your family that could be applicable here if it's really influenced you and your life and how you interact with the world. Again, I've already explained internal thoughts are not tangible experiences, and that applies for this prompt very much here as well. Like, just because something captivates you and it might like spark your brain and how you think about the world, you can't only rely on that, on those internal thoughts and internal monologues as an example of how you've interacted with the world. For example, I've read a lot of essays where people talk about like daydreaming and think that daydreaming counts as a tangible experience for demonstrating their interest in an activity, and that's simply not true, especially if you can't memorize the daydreams verbatim. If it's a recurring daydream, maybe, but again, you can't just talk about that for your entire essay or the majority of your essay. You could definitely use that as a transition sentence, and maybe you're over the word count. That might be the first thing I would consider cutting out perchance, or at least condensing, because those aren't going to provide tangible like examples of how you are interested. They're not going to provide tangible examples of how you're interested in the topic that you're discussing. So that's something really important about that. You really want to make sure you talk about those tangible things. And finally, the 7th prompt is share an essay on any topic of your choice. It can be one you've already written, one that responds to a different prompt, or one of your own design. This prompt is really here if you've come up with an idea and it doesn't address any of the other prompts, and you don't need to come up with that idea on your own. Like they said, you can use existing prompts, and I think a really good way to find existing prompts would be looking at supplemental essays for schools that you're not applying to, because sometimes they will have really fun questions that questions about how they want to personally get to know you that don't exist in the 6 above prompts that we've just talked about. And an example of one of those that might apply to you, I think was really fun, is when I was applying to Ohio State. One of the questions they asked was, which fictional character best represents you and why? And I feel like that could be a fun opportunity for some people to talk about, to write a personal statement about, if that's something that really resonates with you. And you might find other prompts in the essays similarly that resonate with you by looking at supplemental essay prompts for other schools. Another place to good prompts is just to look up conversation starters, and I found like a really good list of conversation starters from ThoughtCo, which I'll link below. Basically, just any and basically, the reason why this is totally okay is because they're looking for something that really speaks to you. You want to write about a topic that really speaks to you, not a topic that you think is going to impress the admissions office the most, because more likely than not, you don't know what impresses them, and you're kind of doing the opposite. Because a lot of people think, oh, talking about academics, talking about my career, being over dramatic about certain experiences that didn't actually impact you at all in your application to try to show off to admissions officers. It's really obvious when people do that, and something that you definitely want to avoid. And the best way to avoid that is just talk about something that's true to yourself and be authentic, and allow the admissions officers to authentically get to know you, because that's what they want to do, and that's what's going to impress them the most. So yeah, don't be scared of this prompt, and don't feel like you need to do this prompt. And you also don't have to write the prompt that you've made up, or the prompts that you're inspired by, to write whatever essay that you're doing for prompt number 7. It's not a requirement. It's just going to take away from your word count, so don't worry about that at all, because again, the admissions officers don't care about the prompts, and the prompts are just for you to help you brainstorm to writing a really great essay that's going to help us get to know you the best. Okay, so before I close out, I do want to talk about one more thing that's really important to keep in mind when you're coming up with your essays. And that is, everything that I've mentioned as examples is totally fair game for you to use in your personal statement and for you to talk about. I feel like a lot of people want to avoid certain topics because they think that they're overused or that they're cliche for XYZ reasons, and that's simply not true. The only thing that makes an essay cliche is if you're talking about like a very stereotypical story arc and only focus on that story arc and not your personal story or your personal relationship with the topic that you're talking about at all. So that being said, the uniqueness of a topic is not going to help you at all if it's not personal. So a lot of people will try to use really crazy metaphors about how plants and ice cream are like the same, and it's because they both, I don't even know how they would be the same, but like something like that, where people talk about those two things and they're like, and they'll talk about those are two things that I like a lot, and it's because plants and ice cream are the same, and they rely on the craziness and of the metaphor and spend the whole essay explaining the metaphor, and then we don't learn about you at all. So that's something that I want to be, something that you would want to be very careful about. Extended metaphors do work sometimes for some people, but it's only when it's very personally relevant to them. So don't try to force yourself to do something crazy and out there if it's not going to help us get to know you personally. So that being said, what makes any topic or any essay unique is how well you tell your personal story and your personal relationship with that topic. So I really focus on that aspect, because again, that's what admission officers want to see, and that's what's going to help you stand out from other people, because no other person is going to have the exact same experience that you did. They might also have moved to a new country, and they might have also had a death in the family or whatever, but that relationship and the way that experience happened and how that experience affected you and why is meaningful to you is not going to be the same for anybody else. So if you focus on your story and telling that in a really personal way with details that are going to allow us to get to know you and your story, then that's going to be a really unique and impactful essay for you in your applications. So yeah, that's what I wanted to leave you guys with. I don't think I've plugged my business at all. I've plugged like my website, but I do this. I do read essays, and I would love to help you guys with brainstorming or reviewing your essays or applications. If you have any questions, so please leave questions in the comments down below, or find me through my email and we can set up an appointment and talk more about that. Because really, I want to help everyone as much as possible, because I think that the college application process can be very inaccessible for some people in terms of finding private admissions counselors, and it's something that honestly I found myself to be pretty decently good at, because I don't only focus on the grammar, which I've not talked about this, but like screw grammar. Grammar should be the last thing that you worry about, but we'll talk about that later when we talk about like actually writing process, because right now this is just about brainstorming. So go through all those prompts, look at them, find ones that motivate, inspire you to talk about in your personal statement, because whatever motivates you and whatever's most inspiring for you or most compelling for you to write about is also going to be the best essay, because that's the most you, right? It's something that you want to talk about. So it's going to be you all around in terms of the story and the topic that you've chosen. And yeah, okay. So thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe, and see you later. Bye.